Hi, this is State Senator Joe Markley, and I'm back with a little update on our budget situation. I spoke to you about it last week in the context of a letter I received from the governor. Today we had a briefing on the Appropriations Committee and the Finance Committee from the Secretary of the Office of Policy and Management, which is the governor's budget writing committee, agency, and also the Office of Fiscal Analysis, which analyzes the budget for the legislature. We received from OPM, as it's known, this analysis of our current budget situation. And let me say, I think it is dire. As expected, we had a $365 million shortfall in our current year's budget, which we will be back reportedly before Christmas to address. The governor is going to make a proposal which will involve shifting funds around to cover that amount. That still leaves us in the budget which we must write next year, $1.18 billion in deficit, $958 million projected for the following year, and $907 million projected for the year after that. A very substantial budget deficit. And although I think it can be accomplished by cutting government spending, I think it has to be, or ought to be accomplished in that way. There's different kinds of cuts, and some that I think would simply be a case of passing the buck. The governor has said, let's say as firmly as one might imagine him saying, that he won't propose a tax increase. I hope he keeps his word on that. The problem is he's going to come back and look at this budget and say, I have shut down the possibility of union concessions by taking those savings 2 years ago and then not really getting them. He's committed money just recently for further higher education initiatives. He can't do much about entitlements because so many of them are tied to federal statute. What I'm afraid he's going to come back and do is say, we have no choice but to cut municipal aid, especially the education grants. And I think that would be a disaster. I think we'd be taking a state taxation problem and simply handing it off to the towns and forcing them to raise property taxes, which are already an onerous tax. I don't think the state can do much more as it stands right now to help municipalities, but I think it would be a terrible time for us to be passing the buck and putting them, leaving them with less money than they anticipate, just as they're in the midst of writing their own budgets, because their budgets are prepared before ours are, in another aspect of this process that's very troubling. I also had conversation specifically about something that's been a concern of mine really since I got here, which is our bonded indebtedness. We have, if you look at it in a straightforward way, by far the highest state bonded indebtedness and total indebtedness of any state in the country. Interestingly, Secretary Barnes of the Office of Policy and Management came to us today with a new way of computing our bonded indebtedness, which made it look not quite so bad. We were only the fifth worst. Well, his way is not a legitimate way, and one way we know that is because the bonding agencies themselves rate Connecticut among the very worst states in the country. Our bonds are very lowly rated at this point after having historically been gilt-edged bonds. And one way in which we've tried to address that, the governor has tried to address that, is by holding himself to a $1.2 to $1.4 billion bond cap. And I questioned last year whether the numbers they were giving us corresponded to that cap, and was basically slapped down and told I didn't understand the figures. Then it's always possible, when it comes to figures, it's possible I don't understand them, but I found out today that I was right and they were wrong. The current 5-year bond projection shows us bonding in the fiscal year 2013 $1.75 billion, $1.71 billion the next year, and then around $1.5 billion in the next 2 years after that. Which is to say every year is above the $1.4 billion soft cap. And next year in particular, or the next 2 years, are substantially above that cap. The last time I brought this issue up, I was told, well, you don't understand, it's the difference between a calendar year and a fiscal year. When you're above it for 5 years, my feeling would be it doesn't matter how you slice the years up, you're over. And today the Secretary Barnes admitted that was the case, and that they were rethinking the bond cap, and that they couldn't promise at this point that they were going to hold to it. I mean, far from promising it, they gave me expectations today that they'll be substantially above it. All I can think is the bond agencies that just last year reduced the rating of our bonds are going to have to be concerned about us taking on even more debt while our economy fails to recover, while our state runs a deficit. I think one thing that we need to confront is the possibility, to my mind the probability, that we're not dealing with a slow recovery from a recession. We're dealing with a different economic situation. I think as I age myself, I realize that my body doesn't recover from things as quickly as it used to. And you start to act accordingly. I wonder sometimes if our state's economy isn't in the same situation, that we keep looking and saying, why isn't it bouncing back? And one reason it may not be bouncing back is it's not the economy that it used to be. I feel that looking around me in my own community. I think a lot of you agree with that. We will be back here before Christmas to take care of the immediate problem, if possible, and we will be back next year to confront the long-term problem. But you know where I stand on this. The only solution is for us to reduce state spending. We should have done it 2 years ago. We should have done it last year. The longer we put it off, the more painful it's going to be, and the worse our economy is going to be in the meantime, and the more the suffering will be when we confront it. So, with that grim prognosis, I look forward to communicating with you again shortly. Thank you.